Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar this evening. I am Serena Cochran-Stewart. I am the Director of Farm Services with Known and Grown. And we're very lucky to have three farmers that are going to be sharing their experience with NRCS and Annalise, who is a NRCS agent. For those of you who are not familiar with Known and Grown, we are a community of 75 member farmers. We're all within a 150-mile radius of St. Louis, and we're committed to using humane and environmentally responsible farming practices. Known and Grown works to support farmers and create a resilient local food system and to spread the awareness about why the type of farming we do is so important. We supply the tools, the resources, the knowledge, and the support that farmers need to succeed. And we also help to inform the public on who their local farmers are and where they can access their products. This webinar is a part of our Farmer Field Day series, and it is sponsored by NRCS. And so many thanks to NRCS for helping us put our farm series together. They have a number of programs that support beginning and small-scale farmers, and we want to help farmers connect with NRCS and be able to utilize those opportunities. So this webinar, A Farmer's Perspective, Implementing NRCS Practices on a Diversified Farm, what we're here to figure out is, are these NRCS programs for me? If you've been to the NRCS website, it can be very overwhelming and confusing, and there's nothing like gaining the knowledge from people who've already been through the process to figure out, is this something that I actually want to do? So we want to go over what the process of working with NRCS is really like. Is it worth it for you to apply for the programs? And what does applying really entail, right? It sounds really good. You just go apply, you get money, you have all these great practices put into place, but there's a lot of other things that go into that. Next. Our panel today, we have Jena from EarthDance Farm, Crystal from Flourish Farmstead, Peggy from Klondike Bison and Bee, and Annalise, who is an NRCS Urban Ag Specialist based out of Kansas City, Missouri. Like I said, I'm Serena Cochran-Stewart, and I'm the Director of Farm Services, but I'm also a farmer who's a part of Known and Grown. Nikki Morgan is the one handling all the tech for me, thankfully, this evening. And she is our Director of Communications, and she is also a farmer. And she has also utilized a lot of the NRCS programs. So she might have a couple of words of wisdom to add in if we're lucky. Before we hear from the farmers, we want to talk a little bit about what the programs are. And so Annalise is going to give a very quick overview about the EQIP program and a little bit about the CSP, so that we kind of all have a little bit of a base for what the programs are. So Annalise, if you'd like to take over.
Yeah, thanks, Serena. I'm Annalise Solana. I work with NRCS in Kansas City, and specifically with urban and specialty crop growers over on this side. I use she, her pronouns. I forgot to mention that. And I've been in this position for about 2 years now. I do a lot of outreach, but I also am a conservation planner, and I support our urban growers over here. And so, yeah, I'll just briefly talk about it. It can get really in the weeds really quickly when we start talking about some of our programs, but essentially for specialty crop growers and urban growers, the two primary considerations are going to be that environmental quality incentive program, EQIP is what we call it, and then the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. And so with those plans, we can provide not only financial assistance, but technical assistance is it's really what we can give out more freely. And then, of course, there's financial assistance that goes along with these plans often. And those are to implement different practices on your operations. So the contract terms and the payment rates, they vary based on the practices that are implemented. We don't have cost data for this next year yet, But generally, if you are getting financial assistance, that's made to cover somewhere between 60 and 80% of the cost of implementing a practice. And we work with all kinds of farmers. So we work with people who own their land or lease their land. I also work with nonprofits. As long as you can show that you have operating control over that land, you're eligible to enter a program with us. And so EQIP is the one we use most often. We kind of look at EQIP as our most immediate way to address challenges. And so we can use this program for anyone who's been farming for at least 1 year on that land. And we're looking at what are some of the resource concerns. That's the terminology we use to see, are we having erosion? Are we having issues with water quality? Are we trying to improve soil health or plant health? And then how can we put together a suite of practices that will improve and address those resource concerns. And so people will come to us, we take applications all year long, but we generally have kind of a short funding period every window. So right now we're ranking applications. They'll be ranked in March or April, and then we'll have a round of funding, and then things kind of slow down until the next year comes around. So the things we see most often in small scale or with diversified farms is going to be a lot of soil erosion, especially if you're on some kind of a hill or have a grade to your soil. Different types of water depletion or inefficient irrigation. That's one we see quite often. Plant productivity and health and plant structure. Of course, if you're growing vegetables, that's always a concern. Plant pressure. But we can also look at energy efficiency or different livestock concerns if that's something your operation includes. And then these are what we call the practices to address those resource concerns. So this is my own sorting of these. You won't see this, this little diagram come up anywhere else, but it's kind of a way to show what are most easy and fast to implement on your operation. Those are going to be things that come up in green. So things like adding cover crops or putting up some low tunnels to help with that pest pressure or mulching. Those are things that really are very approachable for someone who might be unsure about getting started with NRCS. And then it kind of goes up in complexity, and that might be based on, do we need to get an engineer involved, like with a composting facility? Or are we looking at fencing, which has a 20-year lifespan? So now we have to prove that you're going to be on that land for 20 years. So kind of these practices up in the top are going to be those a little bit more approachable practices, and then they can get more complex as we're looking at bigger projects. And so all of those resource concerns and practices, those go along with both the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, EQIP, and CSP. Those programs do run a little bit different, and we can get into questions about those later. But really things that you want to think about before talking to your office is just, is there going to be a program that might meet my goals? Do I have a timeline in mind? Because unfortunately, our timeline is not very, no urgency to it, unfortunately. And so sometimes we can recommend some other ways to do things that are a little bit more urgent. Do we have some funding to cover part of the cost? Because I mentioned before, but we're trying to cover maybe 60 to 80% of that cost. And so there needs to be some outside funding, as well as most of our programs are reimbursable. And so you have to put that money in upfront. There's a little asterisk to that, but I won't get in it right now. And then what are the term commitments of the contract? If you only have a 3-year lease, but you're looking at a 5-year lifespan, that might not be compatible necessarily. And then any restrictions to the program. So those are all things to just kind of, you don't need to have all those answers, but just be mulling them over before you get a planner out on your operation. And I'll leave it there because it's way more fun to listen to people who've done it and tell you about their experience with the programs.
Thanks, Annalise. Yeah, so let's talk to the farmers and see what their experience has been like working with NRCS. And again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. So first up, we have Jena. So Jena, can you tell us a little bit about EarthDance and how you got started with NRCS and your project?
Yeah, thanks, Serena. Yeah, as Serena said, Jena Hood, and EarthDance is we're a nonprofit teaching farm in Ferguson. The farm's situated on 14 acres. We are certified organic, and we grow a, roughly 25,000 pounds of produce on 3 acres is what we have in production at the moment. And it's a mix of field and high tunnel production, as well as a fruit orchard. And we got introduced to NRCS. Initially, our first project that we had through EQIP was a high tunnel project in 2014. And then we had a second high tunnel erected in 2015. I was not a part of those projects. So my real first introduction to the EQIP program, specifically that I'm speaking to today, has to do with a composting facility and a heavy use pad that was constructed alongside the composting facility. So we needed to do this. First off, I- when when I first heard about EQIP, I was just like blown away that there was this like funding for conservation on specifically at that time, this particular funding was for urban farms. So uh, I jumped on getting at the time the NRCS rep out to the farm and to walk through and just like, here's the problems that we are having. Are there things that EQIP can help with? And so it was kind of in that walking around the farm and talking about things, we were able to identify these sort of things that just fit really nicely under those conservation practices. So the composting facility was the of the all of the projects, the one we opted to start to do first. And it was also our biggest project. So in terms of the what the practice was going to pay. So we were needing to do this because at the time we were just literally having compost. We were producing our own compost, but we were also having to bring in compost, and the trucks would dump it and drop it off, and it would just be in a pile. And there was really just on the ground essentially, and there was really no good way for us to get in there with our tractor and turn it. There were bays that had been constructed out of like wood, so like a cedar fence essentially. But it wouldn't allow us with the tractor to get in there and turn that compost like we were needing to. Also, because it's just sitting essentially on the ground, if we had any major rain events, it was really difficult for us to get our tractor in there. The tractor would just was creating just like deep ruts in the ground, and those ruts would fill up with water. It was just like a mess up there. So um, we were really interested wanting to produce more of our own compost, but we were limited because of the current setup that we were working with. So we were able to get going on this after the contract was drawn up and over some time. But we completed that project in 2024. And that asterisk that Annalise talked about earlier, we were able to, because we were categorized as historically underserved, we were able to request our half of the payment up front. What that meant was the clock starts ticking, and so we had to then complete that project within 90 days of receiving that payment. Um, but we had, before requesting that, we had everything lined up with our contractor that was going to be completing the work. That contractor had met with the NRCS engineers, and we were basically just ready to press go when I requested that upfront payment. So we'll talk more about like lessons learned, I think, as we get going and we hear from some of the other farmers. So this has been a game changer for us here at the farm. You can see some of the pictures. It was you know, I was a project manager essentially, just like with tons of moving parts and also, managing a farm at the same time. So something to think about if you're getting into a bigger project, but really has allowed us. We've been able to increase our own compost production, and if there's a rain event, we can still get in there with our tractor and move that compost around, and use it then to fill buckets on the tractor and dump that where we need it elsewhere on the farm. So yeah, glad y'all are here tonight.
Thanks, Jenna. All right, Peggy at Klondike Bison, can you tell us a little bit about your farm and how you got started with NRCS?
Sure. So the pictures you're looking at are my family farm. I grew up there. My parents bought the farm a year before I was born. After my parents passed away, the farm had sat fallow for over 25 years. So hadn't had much done to it. Invasives had taken over. Fences were all down. And we got the brainiac idea to raise bison on this farm. So first thing we had to do is put in perimeter fences. And someone told me to go talk to my local soil and water conservation district, which is a state program. But they were my welcome mat into NRCS. So Soil and Water Conservation District, I encourage everybody to know them also. Soil and Water Conservation District introduced me to Missouri Department of Conservation, who helped me with some of my first prescribed burn that I did on my farm. And from there, I started working with the Conservation Department to put in native grasses. About the time I was just about ready to plant some native grasses, which, by the way, why do you want native grasses? Bison like to eat what they ate 2,000 years ago, right here on the same ground. All of my pastures were cool season European fescue, orchard grass, timothy, things like that. And it wasn't a very big, diverse palette for the bison. So early on, I decided I wanted to change some of my pastures over to native grasses. And Department of Conservation had a program until they didn't. And then for that particular year. So they said, hey, instead of waiting for us, let's go talk to NRCS. And that was my introduction to NRCS. I actually did a joint program with Conservation Department and NRCS to get my very first native grass pasture in the ground. It takes 3 years. It's not something you quickly turn around. But I can tell you, if I had to do it on my own, I would have failed miserably. And I know that because the first year I did fail, even with all the help. We had timing issues, and planting native grasses on the last day of May is wrong, and it will be a colossal failure. So we revamped, did another contract with NRCS Solo, got that 3.3 acre field planted. And this past June was the first time my bison finally got to graze on native pastures, and a pasture that 200 years ago, bison were grazing on. So nice to have that happen. My goal was to move 30% of my overall pastures to native grasses, which gave me an opportunity to talk more in depth with NRCS and got me to ask the most important question, which is, what all can you guys help me with? And under EQIP, we just opened up everything. The picture that you see on my left, hopefully it's your left also, is a water tank that, as you can see, is pretty sludgy and has some ruts in it. And trust me, the worst ruts aren't shown. It was a heavy use area. I put it in with the Soil and Water Department district, but we only built our apron out about 10 feet. So everything beyond, it's about a 50-foot wide area for this water tank. So at the edges, things started eroding. We call that a heavy use treatment area. And this tank was actually better than my north water tank. So that heavy use area is something that NRCS could help me with. The next picture over, you'll see one of my girls gingerly walking over that 3-inch clean gravel. They don't like it, which is actually good because we don't want them to loaf in there. So the kids will go get a drink of water. Mom will go get a drink of water. they're going to muck that up as they defecate on it and things like that. And eventually it won't be as tender on their feet. But the really good news is there's stabilization fabric underneath that gravel, and it's not, or that rock, that 3-inch rock, and it's not going to go anywhere anymore. So that was something that NRCS got to help me with. There are 4 truckloads of gravel on that water tank area. There's another 4 on the other, and there's another truck of gravel of stone on a creek bed that we had to figure out how to get across. So all that gravel, all that stone is expensive stuff, and happily NRCS helped us pay for that. Next picture over is one of those, let's see, that one is, that is a pasture of sorghum Sudan. To plant native grasses, you just don't go out there one day and say, hey, today I'm going to plant the native grasses, even if it is May 31st. Instead, you have to kill the pasture. You have to plant an annual crop for a transitional crop over a year. And then on the 3rd year, you can plant. And then the last picture shows that native pasture after it has grown for a year and a half. So kill the old stuff, plant the new stuff, plant the new native grasses, then wait a year and a half, and then your bison can graze. I really benefited from the technical advice of my NRCS people. Like I said, I would have failed miserably had I not had them for all these things. The documentation they give you to set the standards of how you're going to perform your jobs is spot on. And I don't know why anybody would argue with that, because it makes you do it right. And I want to do it right. I don't want to do it 3 times. I want to do it once. And I want to do it right. So yeah, I have to learn some things. Yes, I have to hire some professionals to help me do it, but it's done right. And I don't think I'm going to be putting gravel on that, either one of my water tanks, for probably 10 years. It's a good thing. And February 21st, I'll be planting my last 8 acres of native grasses. And a year and a half from that standpoint, I will have 30% of my fields in native grasses. So those are just a couple of things we did. We actually came out, NRCS came out with a whole big team. We have other things in my contract from 2 years ago. It's one thing nice, you can work, as long as you're working on your contract, they'll keep extending it for you in most cases. So I have done a timber stand improvement. 50% of my land is timber, and it's got all kinds of honey locust and honeysuckle and multiflora rose in it, all kinds of things that need to go. And we have a plan to address that. My woods are so diverse. We have 6 different plans to address 6 different areas throughout my farm. Without NRCS's help, I could have done it if I could have found the right professional. If I would have wrote a big enough check. But at least with NRCS, I know I'm doing it right. I know I have the right professionals, and I've got a plan to get it going. So the 3 benefits of NRCS off the top of my head is 1, the professional knowledge you get. 2, the payback you get, the cost share that you get. And 3, that little fire they light underneath me to get me to do my job. All those things are very important. For myself, I have been extremely lucky. I have had 2 really good NRCS agents. And the worst complaint I can make is sometimes when they explain things to me, they're so detailed that I have a hard time following them. And I have to ask them to come back and help explain that again. So that all things considered, not a bad problem to have. You got a good NRCS agent, hug them and thank them and see how they can help you, because they'll bring out things that you wouldn't even thought of. They're going to help me with a gutter system and a drainage system. Would have never known how to put that in. I wouldn't have thought that I would have gotten a cost share on that. But those are some of the things that I got.
Thanks, Peggy. And as a livestock farmer, I'm super jealous of the pictures you sent me of your pasture.
I didn't even send you any baby pictures.
All right, Crystal of Flourish Farmstead, can you let us tell us a little bit about your farm and about how you got connected with NRCS?
Sure. So we are a 10-acre farm on the bluffs of the Mississippi River in Godfrey, Illinois. We started out renting this land, and we were able to get a farm service agency loan, which is also connected under the umbrella of USDA. So that's another thing to look at if you're looking for help actually getting the land, if you can prove that you've been farming for a while. So we started renting this land and 10-acre house and 10 acres in 2016, I believe it was. And then we were able to finally talk our landlords into letting us buy it with the help of a farm service agency loan. And when we first moved onto this property, we were vegetable farmers. In fact, we were working at EarthDance Organic Farm School, and we stayed there for a couple of years, and we wanted to, farm our own land. So during the pandemic, we were strictly doing CSAs. So we had weekly shares of vegetables that we were producing each week and dropping them off in various locations around St. Louis. Vegetable farming can slowly take a toll on your mind, body, and spirit. And so we decided, we needed a little break from that. Even though my husband kept working on various farms, I took a break from vegetable farming. So now we've transitioned our farm to fruits, vegetables, flowers, and herbs, but less focus on, vegetable production and more on biodiversity and medicinal herbs and pollinator attracting plants. And we're more of a teaching farm now. So we run Flourish Folk School, which is a 120-hour herbalism education program. And we teach people how to grow medicinal herbs, how to harvest, plant identification and basic botany, and then how to harvest the herbs and make herbal preparations from them. And also showcasing the different regenerative methods that we do on our property. So the first image, we had a giant group of people, and I thought I had another picture that showed all of our friends that helped build the high tunnel. But we had a ton of friends out helping to build this high tunnel. And I believe we got a 20 by 72 high tunnel from Morgan County Seeds. So we applied for NRCS, and we first heard of them through a friend who was working as a NRCS agent, Megan Cosgriff, out of the Illinois office, one of the Illinois offices. I think she was in Edwardsville. And she helped us do the application. We went to the office. It took about an hour to sit down and apply. We applied to both the CSP program and the EQIP program to get a high tunnel. And it basically is a matching grant. And so we were able to get this high tunnel fundraised for some of the money that it took to purchase the supplies up front. And then after you can show that you've built it, then they can, NRCS will cut you a check. And if you're doing the labor yourself, then you get to keep that. If you're hiring someone to do it, you are able to pay out your laborers with that. So it's a really wonderful program. You can cut costs. So we had our friends help us build it, which thanks for anyone who helped those weekends. We appreciate you. And we also used reclaimed lumber and pallets and even like some old garage doors as retention walls or retaining walls. And so we cut a lot of costs by using reclaimed materials as well. And we opted for just a standard high tunnel, no bells and whistles. It's an unheated high tunnel. There's no gutters on it, and no irrigation installed in there. So it's just a really amazing program. And then we also applied for the CSP program, didn't get it our first couple of years, but we are actually meeting with our NRCS agent on Friday to discuss the regenerative pilot program, which is a new funding set that is new this year. And we applied just in the nick of time. And it's a it's the regenerative pilot program, and maybe Annalise has more information on that. But from my understanding, you could get assistance with things that you are doing for soil stewardship, soil building, cover cropping, anything that you're doing on your property that is either contributing to biodiversity, preventing erosion, or offering some sort of ecological function. So we're excited to learn more about that. I think I've spoke too much, so I'll pass it along to you, Serena.
No, not too much, Crystal. Thank you for sharing all of that. Okay, so we have some set questions for the farmers, and if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to those as well. And so these questions are open to all the farmers. So one of the things is the paperwork. Things like this always come with a lot of paperwork. So in your experience, how easy or complicated is the paperwork? And did the process move quickly?
I can jump in terms of my experience with this specific aspect. The paperwork itself was not complicated. There were some coordinating of schedules to get our NRCS agent and one of another person that they were bringing out to sort of just talk through some of the problems that we had identified previously. So just coordinating schedules was a bit tricky. But once we got folks out and we were able to identify the priorities, the agent pretty much did the work. I mean, we had already worked with NRCS, and so we didn't have, there were a lot of our forms were already in the system, and so we weren't having to submit a lot of things that people who were new to the process would have to be doing. But once we signed the contract, things pretty much started moving along, and I began just reaching out to contractors and getting bids to do the work to get going on it.
I think one of the misconceptions might be confusing things like the NRCS programs with applying for a grant. So this isn't where you're saying you're not listing out this whole narrative of what you're planning on doing. It's more like kind of just checking the boxes and plugging in information, not necessarily saying, this is my proposal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah. So there's almost like there's three parts. It's the first thing you do is you sign the application that yes, you do want to apply for a particular program, whether it's EQIP or CSP. I'm a little jealous of Crystal because I thought I was in for CSP, and then the change of administration, my CSP went away, but it might come back down the road. But you do sign for that application, and then you fill out the paperwork. And at the very beginning, there's a little bit more paperwork because, like for me, I felt had to fill out something for being a female landowner and a beginning farmer, even though I'm older than dirt. But I hadn't been farming that long, so I got to qualify for that. And then after they come out and figure out what programs you're either interested in or what programs you want to attempt to get, if you get selected, then they put all the paperwork together with all of the requirements and the specifications. And then you usually sit down with your NRCS person who does a page turn with you and steps you through, just so you know what you're signing up for. If you're going to have to do a timber stand improvement plan, you want to know what that entails so that you're not getting hit with a bill. Because in my case, with my EQIP, everything I do is paid in advance, and then they give me a payback at the end once it gets signed off on. I never found the paperwork to be too cumbersome. Maybe it's because I have fantastic agents and they kind of step me through things. Neither one of my folks left me just sitting there. They were very helpful to make sure I filled things out correctly. I will say one thing I did run up against or run into, not against, is my farm is held in an LLC. So because of that, I have to sign everything as the TTEE trustee, and I had to have a bank account that had that same ownership. Not a big deal, but just something to get to understand is that when they give you a payback, they will do it as a direct deposit to a checking account that has to match your farm's ownership.
Okay. And the next question, I think you guys kind of touched on that as well, was about, nope, not that one. So what was the biggest impact to your land and your business from using these types of programs?
Well, it's been a big impact on my checking account. So it didn't dwindle as much as I was hoping as I was afraid it would. And I mentioned how my water tank areas and my pastures have just been improved tremendously.
We are able to extend our planting season quite a bit by the use of the high tunnel. And so we can grow, on the shoulder months, so we can get an earlier jump start on some crops, and they can last a little bit longer. So we had tomatoes, still producing tomatoes in late November last season. So that was nice to bring some late season crops of tomatoes to the farmers market. And then also we grow a lot of things in our high tunnel that really don't perform that well in the field unless you have tons of compost and tons of irrigation. But ginger, turmeric, hibiscus roselle grows a lot bigger and juicier. So we've had some significant crop success because we were able to grow those things in the high tunnels. And also with this regenerative pilot program, I'm excited to see what sort of timber stand improvements we can do. And we have we're passionate about biodiversity, so removing those invasive species and planting more natives and, native flowering plants for the pollinators during all of the seasons. So it's really impacted us in a way we would have never been able to get a high tunnel of this caliber without NRCS. So we're very grateful as well.
Yeah, I would add on to that. I mean, our first back in 2014 and 15 with our high tunnels that we were able to install with EQIP, definite like game changer for annual vegetable production. As far as the composting facility, I mean, we're reducing our outside inputs because we can now produce more of our own compost because we can manage it better. And we're also not experiencing a bunch of erosion and runoff because we're not destroying the area around the compost facility with the tractor whenever we get any heavy rain events. So that's saving us money kind of all around there. Also, for us, the order in which we completed the current the projects in our current contract, we actually quote unquote made money when we constructed the compost facility. And what that allows, because similar to what Crystal was describing, we were able to get a friend of the farm so some of the labor toward that was in kind. And so that allowed for what that particular practice paid out. We were able to complete the project for a lower cost. So the money that we saved in that we're able to put towards these other practices that are coming next down the line that might not be covering the full cost of those specific practices. So for us, this was a little bit of a no-brainer. We wanted it, we needed it, and it was going to allow us to better fund the next projects that we were getting going on.
Yeah, it sounds like whatever time and effort was put into making the appointments, doing the meetings and the walk-arounds, the site visits and stuff was definitely worth it for all three of you to have these programs put into effect. So that's what we're looking for. And so thinking back when you first started with the NRCS, kind of like the lessons learned, is there anything that you would do differently now if you were applying fresh with NRCS?
I'd probably start taking notes a little better. When you meet with, I mean, those folks know these programs like the back of their hand, and they'll just throw things out. And, knowing if it's a CSP or it's a EQIP or, the various programs, ask those questions. Make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you're asking what kind of compensation. You may not know the exact dollar figure, but you can get an estimate of at least know how much of it towards something they'll pay. And then know your calendar. I wish I would have spaced things out on my calendar a little bit better, especially things like my native pastures. Like I said, that's a 3-year program. And if I'm taking land out of circulation for 2 years, I've got to make sure I've got enough forage for my bison. So that might mean managing your herd size or whatever. But I think most of the things are ask better questions, take better notes, and make sure if you change NRCS agent that you sit down with them and can make sure that they know everything that you've already got going on, so that something doesn't fall through the cracks.
I would have applied sooner. So probably right when we first started renting this land, we would have, looking back, doing it differently. We would have applied right then and there, so that we could get the ball rolling sooner. And also just looking more into CSP and formulating our plans better, working with the NRCS agent to see what kind of programs they approve. And so we probably would have just ask more questions like Peggy mentioned. And then Peggy, you also said, how can NRCS help me? I don't ask that question as often as I should. So maybe there's some real value in that. So thank you.
Yeah, I think for our current contracts, it's fairly infrastructure heavy. We have it's like 6 different practices, and 3 of those are like big projects. And so it's a 3-year contract. So no, we can ask to we can extend that if we need to. But what it has meant for me as the person who's sort of managing it all, I said earlier, I feel like I'm a project manager in a lot of ways. And so it's just like getting people out to all this coordination that goes into getting people out to the farm and getting bids and keeping track of all of those things, and making, getting the invoices from your contractors so they can, we can pay them, like little things that, I wasn't necessarily as responsible for before. That has eaten or cut into my day to day, the sort of like plus that we're already doing as a teaching farm. So I think I would have tried to maybe space those out a little bit more if I could. I'm not actually even sure that's possible, but it wasn't necessarily even even up for consideration for me at the time. I was just gung-ho and excited that we were going to be able to get these things done.
All right, we have a couple of questions for Annalise that are more specific to the NRCS process and back to paperwork. If you are trying to make an appointment with your NRCS agent and you want to be prepared, what type of paperwork or documents do you want to have together before you meet with them to make sure that you're ready and there's no surprises with that?
Yeah, I would say not necessarily paperwork, just kind of keeping in mind what it is that you want to do and what it is you want to achieve. I often will get calls, especially from smaller urban growers, and we'll get out to the farm and take a look at what they have, and they don't really know what they want. They really want someone to help them design what their operation is going to look like. And that's not really the role of an NRCS agent. We're really there to help improve something that you're already working towards. And so I would say that is probably the biggest thing, is just kind of already coming to us with that vision and letting us help figure out where we can be supportive of that vision, and not necessarily expecting that we can create that vision for you. As far as paperwork, there's not really any paperwork that you need. If we want to go down the path of applying in a contract, then of course there's paperwork that comes with that. But for that first initial site visit, there's no paperwork that needs to happen. Maybe knowing that you own the land or who owns the land. Hopefully you know that anyways.
What about a farm number?
Yeah, if you want to apply with us at some point, then you will need a farm number. And so that doesn't happen through NRCS, that happens through FSA. And that's usually a pretty simple process. If you have ownership of the land or you have a very clear lease of the land, to do that, it's 3 forms. And so there is a form that you have to fill out that's basically your contact info and what you're doing. There's an income form because you can't make over $900,000 and be eligible for these programs. And then there's one form on a declaration of whether or not your land is highly erodible. And then there's just some other considerations that go along with that. So I would say if you have someone at your local FSA office that can help you, that paperwork probably takes 30 minutes. Most offices will do it virtually, some won't, but usually you can fill out and sign that paperwork virtually.
Okay. I think we touched on this a little bit, just hearing what the farmer's experience is, but like how much help is the agent going to be in filling out all of the forms? It sounds like they're
Yes,
pretty helpful.
definitely helpful. To actually apply for EQIP or CSP, it's like a 3-page application, and it's your phone number, your contact. Are you a beginning farmer? What program are you interested in? What are you trying to do? I think it's pretty clear, but almost always we will sit down with the producer and kind of be there in case they have any questions. And then with FSA, it's the same thing. Those 3 forms, they look pretty similar to tax documents. There's not a lot of tricky questions that go into it. And then kind of the big, scary stack of paperwork that comes later once we're looking at a contract that you're ready to sign and kind of going through all of the criteria of how you will meet those requirements of the program. But again, it's not like a big stack of paperwork you have to fill out. It's just all of our specs, and we probably over give information. There's ways to kind of simplify some of that.
Okay. And it's been mentioned a couple times already, the regenerative pilot program. I just watched a quick video about that, and I think Nikki sent it to me the other day. And it kind of just sounds like it's just more funding for the programs. So do you have any information that you can tell us about it?
Yeah, I can. We've had a couple trainings on it. And so I've not actually had to try to verbally explain this to anyone. I've only had it come at me. The RPP, the Regenerative Pilot Program, is kind of a variation of EQIP and CSP. So the applications aren't going to look different. It's going to look like an EQIP application, but it'll be written up for 5 years because that's the minimum. Or it's going to look like a CSP application. Those are already 5 years. But the other thing that is not being presented very straightforward is it's actually not more money. What happened for the state of Missouri is we had, for EQIP, they took money out of our EQIP program to put into the RPP program. So we had 44 million for EQIP for the state of Missouri. We now have 33 million, and 11 million is being designated to EQIP RPP. So that's a little bit misleading. But for some producers, it could be really beneficial because you might not be in a space where you can compete really heavily just because you don't have factors that rank your application super high. And so because the RPP program is a separate pool of funding, then if you fit into that program really well, you might be competing with less farmers for funding. Hopefully that makes sense. Overall, it's not a program that's very different. I think it will be a good fit for some people, but I don't think it's going to be a program that a lot of small or urban or diversified growers fit into really well. Maybe that CSP RPP, but the EQIP RPP, we won't go into it because we don't need to, but there's some like minute details that make it really challenging for people to actually complete the process efficiently. Hopefully that was helpful and not more complicated. I'm not trying to be cryptic. I'm happy to go into any answers that I know.
Yeah, I think it's there's limited information, and so yeah, and we understand that there's only so much that the knowledge base that you have on it because it is so new and not being not a lot of description and parameters are being set out for that just yet. So
yeah, I will say that so I'm in area 1, like St. Louis is area 2, so we're different areas. But for our area, we've already had an RPP training, and then there was a national training that came out. So if it's something that you're really interested in, I would just talk to your agent and let them look at your operation and be able to kind of see if you might be a good fit for that program or not. And there's no harm in looking, because if you put in an RPP and it doesn't work, they'll just stick your application in normal EQIP. If you put in an RPP CSP and it doesn't fit, just go into the normal CSP lane.
okay. And does the type of land ownership impact the application process at all, whether it's leased or can you have a mortgage on your farm, or if it's in a revocable trust, does that factor into the application or getting a contract in any way?
Not with NRCS. So, but what we need is essentially verification from FSA, from Farm Service Agency, that you're an eligible operator. So that might look a little bit different in how you do that paperwork with FSA. So like I said, there's generally just 3 forms, but we can, as long as you have proof of operating the land, we can figure out how to work with you. I've had a farm I work with, and they're operating on land that's actually owned by like the community organization in their area. And so what we just needed was that community organization saying, yes, this person has operation of this land for the next 5 years. And then we can get all of that verified.
All right, great. And we want everyone to be able to find their local service center. And so you would go to the USDA website and you can find the center that's closest to you. When we send out an email with this presentation afterwards, I'll make sure to include a link on that. I think Nikki might be dropping that link in the chat if you want to take a look at it right now. And I think, Annalise, would you agree that if you were interested, since you guys are batching and getting things ready right now, that I think May might be a time frame that you'd be able to get someone to come out and look at your land and do a site visit? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I would say if you're interested, you could apply right now. How we rank applications is we have different rounds. So we'll actually have 3 rounds of ranking. So anyone who signs up after January 15th, which is what the deadline was, just automatically goes into that 3rd ranking pool. That doesn't necessarily mean you would not be funded or you would be funded. depends on a lot of factors because you might have somewhere that you have like a special fund pool if you're in a certain watershed or in like an urban area. And so there might be opportunity to get funded this year. But generally, I think your site visits, starting to get connected to your agent, summer, early fall is a good time. Generally, we're doing site visits and getting applications in between like May and September. Usually the round closes in October or November. They extended it because of the shutdown this past year. That's why it was January this year. But it generally is kind of late fall, and then everything's ranked and put out the door in the spring. So if you are wanting to get started kind of summer or really early fall, I would say is a really good time, but any time of the year you can get started with an RCS.
Okay.
Annalise, I have a question
Yeah.
that's just kind of a curiosity. As far as funding for EQIP
Mhm.
or any of, I guess, any of the cost share programs, is there like, does Missouri like get a batch of money, or are there areas within Missouri that like the
Mhm.
different districts get like batches of money, or does Missouri get it and then it goes out to the different, or are they being, I'm asking several questions.
Yeah. No, I get what you're asking. So, generally what happens is Missouri as a state gets a big pool of money. So I think we have like 44 million for EQIP, and I can't remember. It's a little bit lower for CSP. And then in years past, different areas or different emphasis have gotten their own special pools of money based on different things. So like in the south of Missouri, we tend to do more cattle. In the north, there's more cropland. And so then you might have different pools of funding based on the specific needs of those areas. It is not clear whether or not this year is going to operate the same, if we'll get some of those special fund pools. And so, like for me in Kansas City this last year, we had an urban ag Kansas City fund pool. And so, any of my producers that I could fit into that fund pool, they're only competing with the other Kansas City urban ag producers. In that instance, we were able to fund everyone who fit into that because we weren't able to max out that fund pool. But they have not told us yet if that's going to look different for this year. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Yep. That was how we were able to get ours as well. Like we were in the urban hub, St. Louis urban.
There's also another program. It's called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And that is a program where, like, let's say a nonprofit, I'm just going to say Ducks Unlimited, but I'm making this up. Like Ducks Unlimited really cares about ducks, and they really care about the ducks in this one specific watershed. They can apply to that RCP program. They might get $5 million to implement conservation practices to protect the ducks in that specific watershed. So then if you are a producer who's concerned about water in that area, your EQIP or CSP might not necessarily be going to that whole state pool. It might fit into that RCPP because you've hit those criteria of something that was created prior to your application. So it can get a little bit complicated. As with everything at NRCS. I feel like I say that all the time.
We have a few questions in the chat. So I'll start with the easy one from Dion. Is there a minimum farm size for eligibility for these programs?
Yeah, the minimum farm size is 0.01 acres, which is about 400 square feet. So pretty much down to a pretty large garden bed, you're eligible.
Great. And someone else in the chat said that they were on a third of an acre and had several grants. So to kind of put that into perspective. Another question from Rita. I had applied for the EQIP program for a high tunnel and was approved, but was told it had to be placed in the exact area that I had already been growing in the past years. I turned it down because of the trees I would have had to cut down to put it in that, to build it there. Could I apply now with help for irrigation, or is there a certain number of years that I have to wait? So I think like, if you're turned down on an application, is there a waiting period?
To my understanding, there is not, but I would need to double check on that, especially if you're looking at a different practice. If you didn't sign an application, you should be able to apply in the next round for something different. Irrigation, large scale irrigation, most states have, but micro irrigation is something we have here in Missouri that often states don't have. So if you are in Illinois or Wisconsin, or if you're in another state, I cannot promise that they might have a micro irrigation practice approved.
Right. And another question that you already did answer in the chat, but for anybody that's not looking, does your farm have to be for profit and actually selling produce or farm products?
Nope. There's no stipulation on that.
Okay, that's all the questions in the chat for now. If anybody wants to, if anybody wanted to come off mute and ask questions, go for it.
I have a question about the contract. So the contracts are either, depending on what the practice is, 3 or 5 years. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. It could be 1 year. It could be 2 years. It depends on what's written into the contract. With that regional or the regenerative pilot program, those are a minimum of 5-year contracts. But like Jena said, they had a 3-year contract. We've done 2-year contracts. It just depends on what you want to do. Sometimes we'll write the contracts longer just to give you more time in case you get behind, because there's no penalty for working ahead of the contract, but there can be some issues if you start getting really behind on your contract.
So if I were to have a contract, say for 3 years, to put up a hoop house, first year I get the hoop house put up, and then the next year I have a family emergency, I have to sell my farm and move. What happens in that kind of situation? Does that contract just stay attached to the property and need to stay in effect, or am I paying back monies, or how does that work?
That's a good question. So let's say you had a 3-year contract, you put up that high tunnel in the first year, and that was the only thing in your contract. Then that contract is going to close. When you signed that contract, though, you were saying that that high tunnel was going to be up for 5 years. So technically, someone could come back and be frustrated if the next owners then come and tear down that contract. This is where it's like there's an answer that I'll say on a recording and an answer I won't say on a recording. But generally, I've never seen that happen. I think that most planners would really want to work with you and help maybe explain the value of what's there for the next buyer. But if your contract is closed, yes, you've agreed to keep that practice up, but the real life, are they going to come and check 5 years down the line if it's up? They can. I've never seen it happen.
What if the contract isn't closed? Would the new owners be obligated to finish the contract out?
No, the contract would be in your name. I don't know. I'll have to get an answer. I can get an answer tomorrow morning and get back to you. I'm not sure what would happen. You may be on the hook for paying back the cost or not getting reimbursement for the cost of that high tunnel.
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have one other question. So I mentioned our current contract has these couple of big infrastructure practices on it, and 2 of those are falling this year because one of them I had to push from 25 to 26, and 26 is the 3rd year of the contract. Can I extend the contract or remove practices from a contract?
I know that technically both are feasible.
Mhm.
I cannot say that your planner wouldn't be grouchy about it,
Sure.
but I'll also double check tomorrow and get an answer back over to you.
Yeah, it's been on my, I need to reach out to Kevin, and it's just like, well, I got you here. I figured I'd ask.
So either remove the practice or extend the timeline.
I don't necessarily want to do that. I just want to know what my
Mhm.
options are. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think probably extending the timeline would be easier than fully removing the
Okay.
practice. But let me ask and I'll send you an email in the morning.
Okay. Yeah. It's sort of related to that. One of the practices is to digging a well,
Yeah.
and installing, a pump. And we're not even sure that's feasible on our property. So
Mhm.
if that's where if it's not feasible,
For sure, you're not going to be punished for that. Yeah.
right,
If someone
right.
comes out and says you can't do that,
Yeah.
there's no penalties or anything.
Okay. So
It just might be some extra paperwork.
sure. Okay. I can do paperwork.
I can lend a little bit of insight into an experience that we had on our farm. We had a CSP contract around the time that we decided to close down our farm in Missouri, and we had started some of the CSP enhancements or practices, but we knew that there were, I think, over the 5-year contract, there were 3 or 4 things that we were planning to implement, and they were kind of spaced out over a 3 or 4 year period of that 5-year contract. And so we had done, I think, the first 2, but we knew like the third and the fourth just weren't going to happen. And so we did work with our NRCS agent to talk through that process, and we were able to remove those specific practices that we weren't going to be able to get done. For us, obviously, like there were extenuating circumstances, and we were able to maintain the practices that we had already implemented as a part of that contract and keep the contract alive while removing some of those practices. And then ultimately, we did end up making the decision to go ahead and terminate the contract early, just because I was moving away. My parents were still managing the farm and weren't going to be able to fully keep up with it. So all that to say, I think that there is room to have a conversation. And especially if there's extenuating circumstances, like in your case, Jenna, like you don't even know if the thing you agreed to do is feasible. So it's like, okay, well, maybe we should have had like more of a conversation between NRCS and you all beforehand to like know, like, was this actually feasible? And so it doesn't feel like it's anybody's fault at this point that like you're not going to be able to do it. So I always just tell people like the best thing to do is to have a conversation with your NRCS agent and to talk through the problem, because like that's kind of what they're there for, is to help you solve problems. And so this is just a different type of problem that needs to be solved, and it's a lot easier to do that in conversation than to do it in a one-sided way and to just assume, well, I have to like either cancel my contract or break my contract and be penalized for it. There might be another option out there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So just theoretical, I guess, because the main point of meeting with an agent is that you own the land. I get it. But if you wanted to like vision cast, if you don't own the land, but you have the land, like the land is available. Okay. And you need to have a plan for what you would do to get that land, like what you would do with that land as a part of your acquisition of it. Is there a way to kind of talk to someone to just show them what your plans are, what you would do, where the land is, blah, 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 but then, kind of have a trajectory, a strategy developed? Because
Yeah, that's
everything seems to take years. I know this. Everything takes years, and so I know that I wanted to have the irrigation. I know that I need to build out this infrastructure. I know the materials. I know that it's going to be this labor intensive. I know all of this stuff, but I just don't own the land.
Mhm. Would this be land that you like, do you know the owner, or is this just
The city
piece?
owns it.
The city owns it. Okay. Interesting. They may not be able to come out and like be on the land with you if you don't own it, without some
It's not
permission
like
from the landowner.
unaccessible either. It's not
For sure.
inaccessible either.
Or
And if
maybe
you
from the
have,
street.
right,
Uh,
like I'm saying, like, so if my
mhm.
area and my farm is registered, but then the lots across the alley are available, and I want to do an annex or an extension to that land, could I not talk about that because I don't own it?
You could definitely talk about it. To do an EQIP application, you need to have already broken ground and have been,
Okay.
there needs to have been agriculture on that land for at least a year. So if your neighbor owned it and they were growing on it and then you buy it, you'd be eligible to put an EQIP conservation practice on it immediately. But if that land's just been sitting, then you would not be eligible for 1 year. If you're already growing and you've got an agent out there and you're like, I'm working with the city to try to get these 2 additional lots across the street, I absolutely think it's worth bringing that up to talk about what you're interested in doing there and then what like resources might be available down the line. So if you're thinking, oh, I really want bees or I really want just to do vegetable crops, I think irrigation's in the future, then they could help talk you through like the feasibility of that. Of course, none of it's guaranteed, but help you kind
Right.
of with that vision part of it.
Okay. Okay.
The technical assistance can always happen. It's just when it comes down to whether or not some of these things would be funded, that's where you get into more of the paperwork. But getting someone out there, getting some advice, getting some ideas about irrigation or low tunnels or high tunnels, those things can always happen.
And whether or not the place is susceptible to soil erosion.
Yeah, definitely a planner
Right.
could
Like,
help you look at that. Some of that could even happen through like Google Earth and different software, kind of looking at the grade to see if there's erosion potential. But yeah, absolutely, they could help talk you through some of that.
I just want to thank everyone on our panel, Jenna, Peggy, and Crystal, and Annalise for taking the time to share all the information and talking about your experience. We really appreciate it. A lot of what Known and Grown does is about farmers helping farmers, spreading the knowledge and the wisdom and the experiences really helps farmers. I really want to thank you for that. And thanks, Nikki, for helping out with the tech stuff.